Welcome to today's program. I'm Wendy Walsh, and with me today is partner Hunter Shkolnick of Napoli Shkolnick and Hill Harper, Executive Director, and also founder of the social justice law group North Star. Also joining me, Corey Stern, a partner with Levy Konigsberg LLP. Our topic on today's program is the tragic environmental contamination that occurred in Flint, Michigan, and the impact it's had on its residents and their community. Napoli Shkolnick and Levy Konigsberg are recognized across the country for their successful representation of victims who've suffered injury due to environmental contamination. North Star is known nationally for its advocacy and legal representation, protecting the rights of underrepresented working people. Hill, Hunter, and Corey, thanks for being here today.
Thank you for having us.
Thanks so much, Wendy. Great to be here.
Thank you so much for giving me the opportunity.
So what can you tell our viewers about the history of the contamination of Flint, Michigan's water supply? I mean, how did all this happen?
Well, in 2014, the city switched their water supply from the Detroit River to the Flint River. And because of varying pH levels and many things that we could go into, there was a corrosive element with much of the water pipes in Flint, and the community was poisoned. That's the best way to put it. I mean, the long and short of it, a city of approximately 100,000 people was poisoned, and the problem is that many people knew about this long before folks were warned. So between the period of 2014 and 2016, for 2 years, pregnant mothers, little children, the elderly, all sorts of folks were using, bathing, washing their hands, drinking what is ostensibly poisoned water. And it's an American tragedy. It's a story that we have to do better. And the fact that this has happened to this community is tragic.
I think the most incredible thing to me is that they knew about this. They didn't treat the water. Did they realize at all that this water quality was so different and dangerous?
Wendy, there's so many stories. One story that comes to mind is that a very well-known American company who has a plant in Flint with auto parts realized that their engines and their parts were being corroded, and they somehow maneuvered to get water supply back to the original water supply while not letting anybody else know about it. So people knew. Obviously, people knew. And this is a story about how communities that are poor, communities that are marginalized, communities that are predominantly people of color, what we call it is environmental racism. It's an outgrowth of institutional racism and prejudice. And the story of Flint is unfortunately not an uncommon story, but it's a story that got widespread attention, and rightfully so. Yet, just like any other story, as time distances itself from the actual occurrence, fewer news media is there, fewer so-called celebrities are there to take selfies and do things. And so part of our work has been to stay there and really hammer home for justice, really continue the siren call for doing the right thing and getting these people remuneration, getting them remedy that they deserve. Because you have to understand, they have been suffering for 6 years now. 6 years, they continue to suffer. And their suffering's not over, and it hasn't ended. And there are lifetime effects to lead poisoning, particularly in children. So this is a crisis. This is an American crisis. This is a crisis that we all should be aware of and look in the mirror and say, what are we going to do about it?
Okay, let's talk about the impact. What does this exposure to lead have on people who have been drinking it?
lead should not be in people's drinking water, plain and simple. There is no safe level of lead for any human being. Another basic fact. There is no safe level, especially for children. So it impacted the whole community, but most importantly, the children, the younger children, the children exposed in utero. This damaged their neurological system. This causes brain damage.
It's heartbreaking. I'm a mother. I've got 2 daughters. I just can't imagine what it's like for these parents to hear about the long-term impact of lead exposure and what could be happening to their children. Can you tell our viewers more about that?
Lead particularly affects children who are 6 years old or younger because their brains aren't formed. And so lead poisoning, in layman's terms, is really brain poisoning. And so a kid who consumes lead in any quantity in some form or fashion is going to be exposed to a toxin. And it's almost like a forest fire. A fire can rip through the forest and you could put the fire out, but putting the fire out doesn't change the damage that the fire did to the forest to the extent that it was burning. Lead poisoning is the same thing. So a kid's brain who is 6 years old or younger will necessarily be permanently affected, permanently damaged by way of the exposure to lead. And how kids are damaged is through cognitive deficits, which means that over the course of a child's life, it's much more difficult for a child to graduate from high school. Kids who are lead poisoned are far more likely to be left back at least one grade in school. They're far less likely to graduate not just from high school, but from college, which makes them far less employable over the course of their life, which means that their economic earnings or their potential economic earnings over the course of their life are diminished as a result of their exposure to lead. That's to say nothing of what it feels like to be a child who's a year or 2 or 3 older than the kids in your class because you can't comprehend based on your cognitive deficits the same way that the kids younger than you can. And what it's like to be growing a mustache before other kids are going through puberty and to be doing twice as poorly on tests despite being 2 or 3 years older than the kids in your class, and the shame and the anger and the frustration that comes from that for those children.
You and your firm have been doing such brave and powerful work of continuing to give voice to the voiceless, especially when we talk about lead in the water supply, because of these, aging pipes, et cetera, and children are drinking it. So talk about the effects in neighborhoods as a whole.
Okay. To be very clear, there is no, and I want to repeat this, 0 safe level of lead that can be in our systems. So any lead is toxic to us. And what's so damaging and pernicious about lead and lead poisoning is that it enters our system. And after sometimes 28 days, it's not detectable in the blood anymore. And what does that mean? It means that it's already entered your vital organs, your kidneys, your liver. It goes into your bones. And one of the things that we've been doing that is using pioneering technology to do a lead bone test, which is a non-invasive test that's resonant, where you can put it up to an adult or a child's shin bone. And it's in a controlled environment. And it's a resonance test that determines how much lead has actually entered their bones, because lead is so destructive to your skeletal and in your bones because it enters your system. And it even hurts my heart to even say that, because if you can actually use a machine to detect it in your bones, that should just tell you how bad it is. And even though it may not be detectable in your blood anymore. And so lead has been associated with developmental delays, learning disabilities, different types of autism, et cetera, in children. It's been associated with birth defects and other types of delays and problems with pregnancy. It's been associated with issues around Parkinson's and Alzheimer's. It's been associated around, as I said, bone weakening and lessened bone density. So it's a poison, fundamentally speaking. And we have to do something. And so folks don't trust the water supply. And I think it's important that we're having this conversation and doing a deeper dive into how an American city was poisoned.
Hill, you are doing such meaningful work. Thank you so much. This is really important information for our viewers to hear, and knowing that there is help available that can really make a difference for families injured by the contamination of Flint's water supply. Ultimately, we're providing hope.
Hi, I'm Hill Harper, actor, activist, and Harvard Law School graduate. And as many of you know, since 2014, I've been advocating for the rights of the residents of Flint impacted by the water crisis. And you need to be aware that after 6 years of delays, your children are finally eligible for compensation as part of a settlement that has been reached with the state of Michigan. Now, while the state has settled, we will continue to pursue lawsuits against several other responsible parties, including Veolia North America, Land, and the EPA. All of them played an integral role in causing and prolonging the water crisis and possess significant liability. And if you join us, we can prevail through the power of the courts. You may have also been told that your children will be part of a class action. It's important you know this settlement does not include a class action for children, so each eligible child needs to make an individual claim. Now is the time to stand up for you and your child's rights. Let us advocate for you. Legally, we cannot contact you, so you must call us now. If you lived in Flint between 2014 and 2016, please call us today.
Welcome to today's program. I'm Wendy Walsh, and with me today is partner Hunter Shkolnick of Napoli Shkolnick and Hill Harper, Executive Director, and also founder of the social justice law group North Star. Also joining me, Corey Stern, a partner with Levy Konigsberg LLP. Our topic on today's program is the tragic environmental contamination that occurred in Flint, Michigan, and the impact it's had on its residents and their community. Napoli Shkolnick and Levy Konigsberg are recognized across the country for their successful representation of victims who've suffered injury due to environmental contamination. North Star is known nationally for its advocacy and legal representation, protecting the rights of underrepresented working people. It sounds like protecting those rights isn't something that families can do on their own, nor is it something that should be handled by an inexperienced law firm. Now, as I understand it, Napoli Shkolnick and Levy Konigsberg, as well as Hill's firm, of course, the North Star Legal Action Group, have long histories in the areas of environmental litigation and protecting the rights of underrepresented working people. Can you tell our viewers how your firms can help the people of Flint, Michigan?
First of all, I want to say that it's so vital that incredible lawyers like Hunter, Paul, Corey are showing up. And because these folks need top flight representation. There are so many tricks and games and sleight of hand that gets played, particularly communities that are the most marginalized, because folks believe that they can get away with it, quite simply. If you're a community of color, if you are poor, if you are from communities that traditionally don't get represented, then folks believe that they'll get away with what they did. And just as an example, this is stretched on 6 long years, and it should not be the case. In the same state, there was a horrendous case, which, and I'm not going to compare harm of the victims, but just let me give you a sense of a timeline. There was a horrendous case at Michigan State University in the state of Michigan, where Larry Nassar abused 200 plus young women who were gymnasts. It's horrible. That case was settled for $500 million within months of it being filed. Here we're talking about 100,000 Michigan residents, same, who have been waiting 6 years for remedy. Now we can talk about privilege, we can talk about wealth, and where certain folks who are plaintiffs come from and what their race is, what their wealth is, what their privilege may be. But it's clear across this country that environmental racism, particularly with poor communities of color, they get hit the hardest and they get hit the most and the most often. And I love the fact that Hunter and Paul and Corey are showing up and saying, hey, I'm going to join with North Star. We're all going to work together, and we're all going to make sure that these people have representation, that they have voice, and we're going to fight for them in the court of law, and we're going to win for them.
Corey and I have been in the forefront of this litigation from the beginning. We came together because the court appointed him and I as co-liaison counsel for all the individually represented people and families of Flint. The judge appointed us to make sure that there was representation in the litigation for all of the other lawyers who represent clients, and to advance the individual as a party to bring this case, as opposed to being just a member of a class out there. We are overseeing parts of this case pursuant to court order on behalf of individuals, the children and the families individually.
Every child who lived in Flint after April of 2014 is eligible for compensation by way of the settlement. And so parents over the next few weeks, over the next few months, will be able to submit claims on behalf of their children. And depending on what the evidence is as to how a child was affected by lead, will dictate what type of resolution each child gets. The most damaged children in Flint are going to get the highest value resolution because their lives are dramatically affected. But that's not to say that the least damaged child in Flint is not going to do substantially well as well. 80% of this settlement is going to kids who are under the age of 18. And more importantly, 65% of the settlement is going to kids who were 6 and under at the time of the water crisis. And so every one of them stands to benefit their own lives over the course of their lives and into the future.
Well, this is certainly important information for our viewers to hear. And just knowing that there's help available can really make a difference for families injured by the contamination of Flint's water supply. All of this is providing hope. But I have to ask the question, because I know our viewers are thinking it. What is the cost for this type of representation?
Well, the cost for representation, it always comes from the recovery. And in Michigan, we accept these cases, we represent these families, all families, on a contingency fee basis. If we're successful, we receive a contingency fee at the end of the case. We don't charge our clients by the hour. We don't ask you to pay our costs if we're not successful. We're here to do the best job we can, and we do that. And at the end of the case, we seek our compensation from what we recover for you.
It doesn't cost anybody anything. The lawyers who work on these cases do so on a contingency basis. And only if we are able to successfully litigate the case or successfully prosecute the claim on behalf of the children, on behalf of the litigant, on behalf of the claimant, are we paid.
Hunter, Hill, and Corey, the information you give us today will be so helpful to many of our viewers and their families who've been affected by the contamination of the Flint water supply.
Hi, I'm Hill Harper, actor, activist, and Harvard Law School graduate. And as many of you know, since 2014, I've been advocating for the rights of the residents of Flint impacted by the water crisis. And you need to be aware that after 6 years of delays, your children are finally eligible for compensation as part of a settlement that has been reached with the state of Michigan. Now, while the state has settled, we will continue to pursue lawsuits against several other responsible parties, including Veolia North America, Land, and the EPA. All of them played an integral role in causing and prolonging the water crisis and possess significant liability. And if you join us, we can prevail through the power of the courts. You may have also been told that your children will be part of a class action. It's important you know this settlement does not include a class action for children, so each eligible child needs to make an individual claim. Now is the time to stand up for you and your child's rights. Let us advocate for you. Legally, we cannot contact you, so you must call us now. If you lived in Flint between 2014 and 2016, please call us today.
Welcome to today's program. I'm Wendy Walsh, and with me today is partner Hunter Shkolnik of Napoli Shkolnik and Hill Harper, Executive Director, and also founder of the social justice law group North Star. Also joining me, Corey Stern, a partner with Levy Konigsberg LLP. Our topic on today's program is the tragic environmental contamination that occurred in Flint, Michigan, and the impact it's had on its residents and their community. Napoli Shkolnik and Levy Konigsberg are recognized across the country for their successful representation of victims who've suffered injury due to environmental contamination. North Star is known nationally for its advocacy and legal representation, protecting the rights of underrepresented working people. Let's talk about rights. What kind of rights do these families have?
It's critical that folks understand this. There's so much misinformation flowing around Flint, and it's been there since the beginning. And I can tell you firsthand, since I've been on the ground talking with people, texting with people, was hosting virtual town halls and real town halls before, that a lot of that misinformation, quite honestly, has been pushed by folks who don't want people to be represented. There are millions and hundreds of millions of dollars at stake here. And people have been paid, literally paid, to spread misinformation about this. Misinformation like, don't sign up for the lawsuit because the only people that are going to make money here are the lawyers. Don't get representation. It's just not true. There is zero cost to the individual to get represented. Zero cost. If your representation does not get a remedy for you, then you don't pay a thing, period. You're still going to get access to full medical testing. You're still going to be represented. You can go down to the offices where we're doing the bone density or bone lead testing. We can do all of those things. We need to do all those things for you. Let us represent you. And don't be and I call it the at-home lawyer, okay? I have a degree from Harvard Law School, and I don't know all the relevant law, right? I don't know every single remedy that's available through this settlement. And so let a lawyer represent you. Let the lawyer figure out what claims you have within the bounds of this settlement. And to be very clear, another piece of misinformation is there is no class action for children in this settlement. Let me repeat that. There is no class action for children in this settlement. People have been running around saying that.
So does that mean, so that I understand, because there's
Yeah.
no class action for children, each individual child must seek their own representation?
Yes, each individual family, individual child must seek representation, and that's critical. What I love about the work that Napoli Shkolnik does is that they're extremely experienced in the mass tort area, which is you're going to get represented individual as part of a group, but you're still getting represented individually. And you reserve a lot of power there too, right? And it's so important to understand every person in Flint who was there between 2014 and 2016 has experienced harm. There's all sorts of types of harms you could have experienced. You could have experienced physical harm that hasn't presented yet. You could have experienced financial hardship from property values. You could have experienced work hardship from your job being impacted and the economy of Flint being impacted because of the water crisis. All of these things and many, many, many more are there, but it's critical. And remember, children are critical in this piece primarily because they can't seek their own representation. The parents have to sign up these kids to be represented. And we can't call you. I can't go and call you at your number and say, hey, are you representing? You have to call us. You have to opt in. You have to opt in to be represented. That's why we say, please call, please call, please call, because we can't just go to you. You have to come to us and call and please be represented. It's critical. Get your children represented right now, right away, before the window closes.
And you're not giving up, are you? This fight has been going on for a while, but you're not giving up.
We're not giving up. We're going to proceed with whatever settlements come along and go to trial against those defendants who are not willing to accept responsibility for this disaster.
All that we can really do for our kids is to put them in the best positions to succeed. And every kid is born with some level of potential, whether they have the potential to be an astrophysicist or they have the potential to manage a fast food chain. Every kid starts out with some level of potential. And what lead poisoning does to a child is it literally diminishes their potential. Kids don't always even know what's happening to them. And so they're not going to advocate for themselves. And so as communities, as parents, we need to advocate for our children.
You know, Hill, this is a unique time in history. There's a lot of talk about racial justice, social justice. There's talk about structural racism. I'm wondering, is this conversation relevant to this?
Yes, Wendy, it absolutely is. You know, here's the deal. Many of our most marginalized communities, folks have been beaten up. They've been beaten down in so many different ways that they feel that they're powerless, that they feel like nothing's going to happen anyway, that they feel that they don't have agency or voice. And our job at North Star, and Corey will say this, and Paul will say this, Hunter will say this, is to represent folks and give them power. Use the power of the courts as their arm, their agency, their voice. And the more we get people to sign up, the more we get people to actually let us represent them, the less we'll see this type of harm happening to these communities, because people say, whoa, 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 whoa. You know, if we harm communities like that, 80%, 90% sign up and they're going to make us pay. We have to make the wrongdoers pay. And this settlement, this first piece of the settlement is just the beginning. That's the state of Michigan. We still have to go after Veolia. We still have to go after the EPA, and we still have to get remedies from other wrongdoers. So I want folks to know that this is just the beginning. We're just starting with this settlement, and we're going to go further and keep pushing and make sure that everybody who signs up with us is represented all the way through the whole course of getting multiple settlements or going to trial if that's what we have to do.
I'm sure that's good news for so many families. Well, Hunter, Hill, and Corey, the information you've given us today will be very helpful to many of our viewers and their families who have been severely affected by the contamination of the Flint water supply. Napoli Shkolnik and Libby Konigsberg record of protecting the rights of environmental contamination victims and North Star's history of advocacy and legal representation of the underrepresented is something your firms have a right to be very proud of. Thank you so much for joining us today.
And thank you.
Thank you so much for giving me the opportunity.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Wendy.
And thank you for watching.